This week on The Climate Show, we're delving into our brains, looking at the psychology of climate change and asking why it is we find it so difficult to get off the couch and do something about it, preferring just to slump back and let the messages of doom wash over us. Hello, I'm Tom Heap and welcome to the show. In a week when the United Nations released a comprehensive scientific report offering humanity a final warning to avert climate catastrophe, why is it we find these bleak but urgent messages so easy to ignore? Also on the show, we take you to Vanuatu, the Pacific island already being battered by worsening climate events. They hope a UN vote next week will provide the chance to hold polluting nations to account. I hear about the flight of the Osprey expedition as one woman attempts to make an epic 10,000-kilometre journey to highlight how climate change risks one iconic species. And as the clocks spring forward this weekend, are the changing seasons themselves shifting? But first, ticking time bomb, final warning for humanity. We've heard some pretty dire predictions this week. But does this kind of language just turn people off? I've been looking at how our brains deal with climate change.
Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast.
The world has suffered greatly from ongoing climate change.
We can't afford any time to be lost.
These warnings all follow this week's critical report from the United Nations on the causes, effects and solutions to climate change. They hit hard. So how come that message that the end of the world could be nigh doesn't get through to our thick skulls? How come we're not animated into taking urgent action rather than continuing pretty much as usual? Thanks. I've taken a trip to the psychologist to find out.
If you frame things in a way that scares people, it might lead to disengagement and people might tune out because they feel too overwhelmed to want to take action. And so that leads to maladaptive behaviors like disengagement, denial, tuning out, feeling overwhelmed. And worry, on the other hand, can be a motivator. We want people to be appropriately worried and motivated to take corrective action, not scared to the point where they're just going to run away and hide, so to speak.
One of the UN report's authors, Freddie Otto, has seen that firsthand.
I think people I talk to are really scared. There's a lot of, because...
Are they scared into action?
No, they are not scared into action. And I think that's a problem because we have reporting about the threat and with the very doom and gloom, and if you think you're doomed, well, it's too late to act, and that's just not true.
We decided to test out some of the phrases about climate change that Sander the psychologist thought might get interesting reactions.
Experts agree, it's real, it's us, it's bad, but there's hope. And so this message signals to people that it's a serious issue, but that there's hope, and so it ends on a positive note. Climate change is going to destroy humanity within the next century. I mean, this is a very scary scenario, and that I would predict that people typically tune out from that and disengage. More and more people are changing their behavior to address climate change.
Well, these are the statements that Sander van der Linden recommended we try out on the public. I'm in Piccadilly Circus. Who's my first catch? According to each statement, does it make you feel engaged at one end or disengaged at the other? So the first one, with regard to climate change, experts agree it's real, it's us, it's bad, but there is hope. Does that leave you feeling engaged or disengaged? On that scale, where would you pin your first brain?
Engaged.
Engaged,
Yeah.
Okay. This one is slightly more doom-laden, if you like. Does
Yeah.
that leave you feeling engaged or disengaged? And the last one, which is about other people are changing their behaviour, would that kind of encourage you as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So what has the experiment shown? Well, this is human psychology, so it never quite goes according to script, but there are some trends here. The top one, about expert opinions, That does seem to engage people. There's a real cluster of 5 or 6 up here at the engaged end. The more doom-laden one, although there is some spread, there are more down at the disengaged end. There are 5 down here, some in the middle, and one, yeah, they did really engage them. As to the more herd mentality one, a pretty even spread. But for one sustainability influencer, social pressures did kick her into action.
I was actually called out on social media. So I was sharing my plant-based lifestyle on YouTube, and someone said, great that you're eating vegetables, but you're wearing fast fashion, and that doesn't really align. And so that was the moment where I thought, oh, I kind of felt a bit taken aback at first. Yeah. And then I went away, watched some documentaries, read some books, and here we are.
And what would you say to others, or maybe your followers indeed, who are watching this? What do you think would get them to change their behaviour in a more climate-friendly direction?
I think it's that their decisions and actions matter. It's an invitation to say, hey, come and join us, we're having a great time, and we're actually making a difference.
Well, how are people receiving these climate change messages? Of course, via the media, broadcast or indeed print. So I'm having a little paper review here with Tom Walker, aka comedian Jonathan Pye. Tom, I mean, we look at the papers here that came out on Tuesday, the day after these dire warnings. Didn't make lead story on any of them, as far as we can see.
Not really. You've got climate catastrophe imminent, says UN on page 19. Let's give them their due. You've got, you know, Putin meeting the Chinese president. You've got Westminster going bonkers this week. You've got the Met Police being found to be, you know, all sorts of horrible things. So it's not been... You know, it's kind of understandable that a lot of the pages are full of other stuff.
Jonathan Pye released a new video this week translating climate science.
Imagine that! By some incredible miracle, we can still save ourselves. You can present some very, very tough, difficult issues, and if you can make people laugh, they're more likely to listen to the serious bit afterwards. If someone can watch something that I do about the environment, it changes their mind, gets them to write to their MP, gets them to get marching, and gets them proactive, then I think that's something that I can do, and that I'm glad to do that, you know.
Freddie, the climate scientist, has one message she wants to get across.
The most important message is that we have all the knowledge, all the tools, all the technology we need to keep the climate from warming more than 1.5 degrees. We have an important job to do to make life better for everyone, but we can do it.
So how bad are things, and is there a narrative of hope to be found? Here's our science editor, Tom Clark, to break it all down for us.
This is the 6th report from the IPCC, and in the 20 years I've been covering climate, each has said broadly the same thing. We have to act now on climate change, time is running out, but we have the solutions. The difference is that in each report, the science has become more certain, the calls more urgent, the time to act ever shorter. And what makes this one stand out is it's likely to be the last warning we have before it's too late to avoid 1.5 degrees. Take a look at their modelling and you can see why. What we're seeing in the red line are current policies and targets. And the blue line shows the dramatic cuts that need to happen if we're going to stay within 1.5 degrees of warming. A target that will slip within the next decade, the report finds, unless global carbon emissions are cut in half by 2030 and to near zero by 2050. So what does that look like in real terms? Well, it looks like this. The darkening colours show the percentage of species threatened with extinction at different levels of warming. 1.5 degrees, the worst impacts are confined to the tropics. But above 2, there are significant threats to species, including large amounts of marine life globally. And there's, of course, an impact on human health too. Rising heat and humidity will increase the number of days and the range of locations where heat stroke is a concern. And many people will need access to artificial cooling just to survive. One of the most striking quotes from the report says, there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. The choices and actions implemented in this decade will have impacts now and for thousands of years. But the report, according to the UN Secretary-General, is best viewed as a guide to what those actions should be.
We have never been better equipped to solve the climate challenge, but we must move into warp speed climate action now. We don't have a moment to lose.
Many of the tools to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are right here in front of us. Technologies like renewable energy, green buildings and electric vehicles, but also protecting forests and wetlands and oceans to absorb more carbon and adapting agriculture as well as our diets. But on current trends, we are looking at more than 1.5 degrees of warming in the coming decades, and we're not doing enough to adapt, especially as the report warns the longer we wait, the harder adapting becomes. Adaptation options that are feasible and effective today will become constrained and less effective with increasing global warming, it says. With increasing global warming, losses and damages will increase. Additional human and natural systems will reach adaptation limits. The main take-home from that is the longer we delay, the more costly and difficult adapting becomes. And with it, the risks of things going very wrong. The war in Ukraine, the small boat migrant crisis, rising inflation were stories that kept this week's warning from the scientists off newspapers' front pages. But conflict, food and energy insecurity, migration, they're just the sorts of things that are becoming more likely as we allow the warming trend to continue.
A country on the front line when it comes to climate change is the Pacific island of Vanuatu that has recently suffered from 2 Category 4 cyclones. It comes just as the United Nations General Assembly is about to vote on whether the International Court of Justice should be able to apply legal consequences for those who caused the climate change in the first place. Sephora Smith reports.
As the UN warns there is a rapidly closing window to secure a livable future for all, the Pacific island nation of Vanuatu is already under assault from extreme weather.
It was ferocious. Never been experienced such anger in the wind. It howled and it was just unimaginable. I was in fear.
Category 4 cyclones Judy and Kevin tore through homes, cut electricity and wrecked livelihoods, affecting the vast majority of the 320,000 people living in this country. Housewife Karen Patricia lost her kitchen in the flooding caused by the storms.
So the wind came and the flood came. The flood took my kitchen and put on the other side of the road. My properties were there. So now I have no kitchen. I just cook beside my house, and my property, everyone was gone, like plate, cup, spoon, everything.
Scientists say climate change has increased the occurrence of the most intense and destructive storms. But this country is putting up a fight. The government of Vanuatu is leading a call for the International Court of Justice to clarify the obligations of states to tackle climate change and the consequences of failing to do so under international law. The proposal is expected to be put to a vote at the UN next week, with more than 100 of the 193 UN nations publicly supporting the initiative. Many here support government efforts to galvanise global action against climate change and say they feel let down by the inaction of industrialised nations.
I would like to see some accountability, some admission of accountability by developed countries.
It's important for Vanuatu to take this message, our government, to the world, and to make sure that other countries around the world have the respect for other people, regardless of where they're living.
It must be extraordinary to live in a country quite so vulnerable to some of the most immediate effects of climate change. Now, after the break, we'll be going on a more than 6,000-mile trek to follow one of our most iconic migratory birds, the osprey, to see if its movements are becoming vulnerable to climate change. And also we'll be asking, despite this rather cold and wet spring, how is our spring overall responding to climate change? Welcome back to the show. Now, at this time of year, some of our most majestic migratory birds are making their way back to Britain from their winter homes in West Africa. Just this week, a breeding pair of ospreys returned to the Loch of Lowes in Perthshire, just 6 hours apart, something that the Scottish Wildlife Trust says has never happened before.
The female arrived back first, started pimping up the nest, and lo and behold, exactly 6 hours later, her mate, LM12, landed on the nest, and they quickly became reacquainted. He was showing off in the sky, doing a sky dance for her, and Julie came in with a fish to seal their bond.
I love those pictures, especially the one of the osprey couple. It looks like they're saying to each other, "How was your journey, dear?" as if they've just come in from work. Ospreys' history has been a slightly checkered one. Good of late, they're returning to a number of lochs and lakes, but previous to that, they almost became extinct in this country, thanks to egg theft and other forms of persecution. Their threat now is mainly from climate change, especially on their long migratory route from West Africa. Their epic route takes them from Guinea on the west of that continent all the way up to Scotland and other places in England as well. And they face plenty of challenges along the way, not least storms and the Sahara Desert. And now I'm about to join someone who'll be accompanying them on their journey, and that's Sasha Dench, who's an adventurer and real enthusiast for migratory birds, and she is in Guinea. Sasha, very good to see you. Tell me, exactly what are you going to be doing on your journey, and what do you hope to find out?
So we've been concerned for some time about the ospreys. Obviously, an incredible effort is being put in Scotland and across the UK, and in fact across Europe, to reintroduce the birds where they had disappeared. But now we're still facing a situation where about somewhere between 60 and 70% of young birds don't return. And so we're really interested to find out more about that. So in order to do that, we figured the best possible way to do that was to explore their entire migration range all the way between the UK and Europe and West Africa. So we're going to be doing the journey, hopefully learning from locals all along the route, hearing from them any threats they see the ospreys facing. And we're also trying to look at some of the bigger issues faced by the birds.
And how will you yourself be travelling?
So we will be travelling in a Land Rover. There's 4 of us going to be.
There's a clue behind you, yeah.
There is a clue behind us. It's actually got a pop top as well in it. And so we'll be going mostly by land so that we can meet with people. Some of the key issues where an aerial view will give us an important insight. We'll be using drones.
What could be the threats regarding climate change for these birds?
For example, more extreme weather conditions. So many of the juvenile birds, because lots of them, well, they've basically come from Northern European populations. Most of the young birds, unfortunately, think they're coming from Europe when they do their first migration on their own. So they try to take a much more westerly route, and they end up on the tip of Cornwall trying to figure out which is the shortest route to the next bit of land south. And many of them get blown offshore. So we've already had 2 of our young birds disappear, or one of them, certainly 2 of them disappear. One of them definitely lost out to the sea. They also have this vast expanse of the Sahara to cross, and the Sahara is getting bigger, but also the weather conditions more extreme. There's also some unintended consequences, unfortunately, for us. So we need more renewable energy. Wherever you build renewable energy, there's also the power line infrastructure that's needed, and that is causing a problem for many birds if they aren't constructed in the right way.
Well, we'll be checking in with you over the coming weeks. Just briefly, what kind of things might we expect to learn?
The first thing that we're going to be going to do is trying to find a beloved bird called 4K, who was tagged at Rutland Water years ago. He's now been connected with a local community in the mangrove forests of Guinea, who have renamed the bird. They thought 4K was a ridiculous, unfriendly name. They've called him Dobire. We'll go and find out if he is still where he was before his tag has stopped working. On the way back, we're going to try and find a juvenile bird called Glenn, who's already had an incredible venture. He hitched a ride on 2 container ships on the way to get here. He was considered missing twice. Even a police search was sent out for him. But he's decided to stop his migration in the middle of the Sahara and not go forward. So we're going to figure out if this could be a new strategy for birds. But we're also going to go and see sites where we know that some of the key habitats they're using are disappearing, and figure out why.
Thanks, Sasha, and good luck. Well, an amazing journey. Can't wait to see how they get on. Now, the clocks are springing forward this weekend, and the signs of a changing season are all around us. But is climate change bringing things even further forward? We've been finding out.
As spring develops, tree after tree and shrub after shrub will come into flower. I started gardening, you wouldn't plant anything out in the open ground until late May or early June because the risk of frost was so great. Nowadays, the frost risk pretty well evaporates by the end of April. This is a leucosium, or a snowflake. It's little snowdrop-like flowers, very attractive at this season when the snowdrops are over.
If you were to ask a meteorologist, they would say that spring is between March, April and May. But of course, nature doesn't follow our rules, it follows its own rules. And so season creep really is when we're starting to see things out of season. So an example this year is that we saw flowering hazel, flowering snowdrops and bud bursting elder before Christmas.
Everything in spring, once plants have had their winter chilling, is directly dependent on the temperature. And as the temperature rises, things grow faster. But there's more to it than that. Plants are integrating mechanisms, so they sort of sum up and take an average of the temperature over the period. So even though there may be fewer frosts and less intense frosts, the plants are growing much more now than they used to.
There was a gentleman called Robert Marsham who started recording what he called his indications of spring in Norfolk in 1736, and we still have his records, and they formed part of the historic basis of the Nature's Calendar records, which is members of the public recording signs of the seasons as they change.
And we'll be on air over the weekend at 3 o'clock and 7 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday, or you can catch up anytime online. See you next week.